Gloves can be intimidating to knit if you've never tried them before because there are a lot of unique techniques involved in them that you maybe haven't seen in other patterns. In this tutorial, we're going to start from the very basics. All you need to know how to do is knit and purl. We're going to get you going on knitting with double pointed needles and knitting the cuff, learning how to do make one increases to work the gusset, how to work backwards loop cast on and picking up stitches to knit the tiny tubes of the fingers, and then decreasing and finishing the glove so that you have limited gaps and the glove is a nice fit. To knit this with us, you're going to need a set of size 3 double pointed needles like this, and you're going to need some worsted weight yarn. I've taken the label off this, but you can kind of get the idea of the yarn that you're going to need. These techniques are pretty basic across most glove patterns, but if you'd like to follow along with these gloves, this pattern is available for purchase and download over on my website. And first up, we're going to learn how to get started with double pointed needles and knit the cuff of the glove. First up with the gloves, we're going to get started on the cuff, starting down here at the bottom of the glove, working with double pointed needles, and we're going to work in 2x2 rib. The double pointed needles allow us to work in a tube, and of course the gloves are just a series of tube. This lets us knit a small circumference tube. They can be kind of intimidating if you haven't used them before, but really using double pointed needles is just like normal knitting. You're only going to be knitting with 2 needles at a time. Let me show you how to get started with this. I've already cast on part of the stitches that I need for the gloves, and I'm using the long tail cast on. And if you need a review of the long tail cast on, I have a technique video that will take you slowly through how to do this cast on. If you do a knitted cast on, that works too. So you can either cast on all your stitches onto one needle, which however many stitches your size calls for, and then just transfer them to 3 needles like this. You put your needle in as if to purl and slide them over. Or you can actually, let me undo this, you can actually just cast on to each needle, and then that saves you the trouble of transferring them over. And the way to do that is to get yourself set up to do the long tail cast on, and instead of going onto the needle that you've been using, you get yourself started and you just put a new needle in there. Let me show you again. I'm going to wrap it around my thumb and just let these 2 needles hang and put that new needle in there. Take the working yarn and wrap it and pull it through. And then when I pull that through, I really want to give a tug to the tail end and the working yarn because I'd like to eliminate the gap between the 2 needles as much as possible. Okay, then I'm going to cast on the remaining stitches that I need here on the 3rd needle. Again, if you need some help with working this cast on, it's called the long tail cast on. And I have a technique video for it. Okay, I'm not counting, but I'm just going to cast on what looks about right for demonstration purposes here. Okay, now you have stitches spread out over 3 needles, and to get started with this, we're going to break it down into as many steps as we need to get started with this to make it easy. Get everything as untwisted as you can, or just get everything untwisted, and put your needles into an H, the letter H shape, like this. Your working yarn and your tail are over here on the right needle. Now when you have this untwisted, that will mean that all of your knots from your cast on are all lined up on the inside of this H. Nothing's twisted when you see that. Okay, now this here is going to be my first stitch that I knit, and I'm going to use the working yarn from over here. And when I use this yarn to knit this stitch, it's going to close up the tube. So that will be our first step. I'm going to turn this around to get this first stitch in front of me like this and scoot it down to the tip of the needle. Now notice I'm not picking anything up off the table yet. And the reason for that is as soon as you pick things up off the table, things can get twisted. We're going to leave it on the table as long as possible to keep it from getting twisted. So my first stitch is very close to the tip of the needle, ready to work. I've separated my working yarn from the tail end, so it's easy for me to grab it and use. I'm going to put my needle in to the left of the first stitch to knit it, okay? You see, I'm just working with 2 needles. These other 2 needles are going to hang out. These 2 right here are going to hang out until I get to them. These 2 needles right here are the ones I care about. So my needle's in. I take the working yarn. I'm going to work a completely normal knit stitch by wrapping the back needle. And after I do that, I can pick this up off the table because it can't really get twisted anymore. I'm going to pull that stitch through, just a normal knit stitch, and go into the next stitch and knit that as well. Now I'm working 2 by 2 rib. You take a look here, I'll spread it out a little for you. This is knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and that's what gives us this stretchy cuff. Before I can work the purl stitch, I need to pull my working yarn forward between the 2 needles and purl 2. Don't get discouraged when you're working the cast on row because it's tighter than the other rows. It does go more slowly, but you can pick up speed once you get past it. I'm going to go back to knitting now, so I pull the yarn, the working yarn back between the 2 needles because my yarn needs to be in back to knit. I'll knit 2, pull the yarn forward, and purl 2. Back to knit 2. And I want to get to the end of this row so I can show you how to move on to the next needle. Back to knit 2. Whoops, I just dropped a stitch. Just grab that. Okay, remember that I didn't count how many I was casting on that last needle. I should be ending with purl 2, but I'm just going to end with purl 1 because I didn't count my stitches, but really for demonstration purposes, that's okay. And I've had you arrange these stitches so that you will always end with purl 2 on the end of each needle. And when you start the next needle, you will always start with knit 2. That's a good way to know that you're on track with the 2 by 2 rib pattern. Okay, so I finished knitting this first stitch. My working yarn's coming out of this needle. When you're working with double pointed needles, your next stitch is always to the left of your working yarn. So here's my working yarn. I'm going to jump over to this needle, and that's my next stitch. So I'll get it close to the tip of the needle so I can work it. And again, I'm working with this empty needle in my right hand, going to this needle to continue knitting. And so these 2 needles are just going to hang out there and wait for me to get back to them. So I'll knit across here and then jump over to this needle, knit across here, always starting with an empty needle in my right hand. You're going to knit the cuff for as long as the pattern tells you, depending on the size that you're knitting. And next up, we're going to get started working with the thumb gusset. You should be at a point in your gloves now where you have finished knitting the 2 by 2 rib in the cuff, which is a stretchy part of the glove, a very stretchy part of the glove. And now we're going to start with the stockinette part. From here on out, we're going to be knitting every round. I don't think there's any more purling in the glove at all anymore. And the thumb gusset is this bit of knitting right here. And the way that the hand is shaped, it's all pretty straight through here, but we have to increase here to accommodate for the thumb, and that's what we're going to do. Let me show you a close-up in the finished glove. It's this line, and you can see we started off with just 1 stitch between these 2, and we go up like this until we've increased until we have a lot of stitches between these 2 markers right here. So to get started with the thumb gusset, this is where you're going to need a couple of stitch markers, and I'll show you what those look like here in a minute. Oh, before we do that though, you see where your tail end of your yarn is here? The reason we haven't bothered with stitch markers to mark the beginning of your round is because wherever your tail end is, if you follow that up between 2 needles, this is the beginning of your round. This is the first stitch here. So you always want to, just like when you're working back and forth in rows, this is where you want to get back to the beginning of the round when you start working on a new section of the gloves. So for the thumb gusset here, you're going to work up, you're going to follow your pattern for your size to knit up to the number of stitches it tells you to. And I'm not counting here, but I know that I do need to knit past this first needle. You see, no more purling. It starts to go much more quickly. Okay, this looks about right. The pattern tells you to place a marker. So I have a little ring marker here that I'm going to put on the right needle to make one left. And I'm going to do that here. I'm going to show you a close-up of this in just a moment. Make one left, knit one, make one right. I'll show you, I'll break this down for you as well. Place another marker, and then continue knitting with the round. Okay, let's take a closer look at those make one stitches. I have this sample here knit up on big needles so I can show you how to do this. Make one left is a left leaning increase. Make one right is a right leaning increase. And make ones are, as far as noticeability go, they are the most invisible increase stitches. To work one, I mean, you see here how this sample is like what you're working. It's just plain knitting around, or when you're knitting in the round. So this is exactly how it'll look for you. When you separate two stitches, you'll see an obvious bar between the two stitches. If you pick that up, or I always use my right needle to pick it up because I'm just more coordinated with my right hand. I'll pick it up and put the needle in front to back. Or you can just take your needle and put it in front to back on that bar between two stitches. Then you knit that stitch through the back loop. A normal knit stitch would go in like this. Through the back loop goes in like that. And you knit it. So you've made a stitch out of the bar between two stitches. I'll show you that again. I'm going to take the tip of my left needle and put it into the bar between the two stitches from front to back. Then I'm going to knit that through the back loop. Okay, that's a left leaning increase. That's the first one that you'll work. A right leaning increase, the only difference is that you're going to pick up that bar from back to front, and you're going to knit it normally through the front loop, which can be tricky. I'll show you again. I'm going to pick that up from back to front. So I have this loop on the needle, and then I'm going to knit it normally through the front loop like this. The real trick with make one stitches is if it's easy to get your needle in to work it, you're not doing it right. If you're knitting a make one left and you're putting your needle in the normal way through the front loop of the stitch, it's going to be really easy to put your needle in, but it's going to create a hole in your work. If it's difficult to get your needle in, it means that you're making the correct twist on the stitch, which is going to keep you from getting a gap in your work. So you're going to follow your pattern, and you're going to do the make one increases like that every third row. I like to use a row counter to keep track of where I am when I'm doing that part. And then once you reach the required number of stitches between the two markers for the size you're knitting, we're going to put those thumb gusset stitches on reserve, which we're going to cover in the next video. Now you should have finished the thumb gusset stitches, meaning that you have the correct number of stitches between your marker that your pattern calls for the size that you're knitting. Now we're ready to reserve those thumb gusset stitches, because what we're going to do is, you are right here, right now. We're going to put these stitches on a piece of scrap yarn to save them for later, and then after we've finished all the other fingers, we're going to go back and knit the thumb itself. So let's start that row. The beginning of my row is here. I've already knit across this first needle, and I'm knitting up to where my markers are for the thumb gusset stitches. I have a few more stitches to go here. There are a lot of stitches on this needle once I've finished the increases. So I'm knitting up to this marker. I'm removing the marker. We don't need that anymore. And I'm taking some scrap yarn and a tapestry needle. I'll thread that onto here. And now I'm going to slide all of these stitches between the markers onto this scrap yarn. To do that, I put my tapestry needle in as if to purl and just slide those stitches onto the tapestry needle. You can be careful and do them one by one like this if you like. When I get to the second marker, I take that one out. And then now my stitches are all safely reserved on this piece of scrap yarn. And I always use scrap yarn in a contrasting color, so it's really easy to see. Now, you can see here that it's starting to look more like a glove. This is actually a thumb, and this is the hand part right here. And we're going to continue knitting in the round with those stitches kind of sticking out. And to do that, we need to cast on one stitch on the right needle here before we continue knitting with the stitches over here. We're going to use the backwards loop cast on to cast on one stitch. So I have my working yarn here. I'm going to take it in my left hand with my thumb on the yarn like this, flip it and slide it onto the needle. I'll show you that again. This is important because we use the backwards loop cast on a lot in this pattern. So you put your thumb on the yarn like this, flip, put that loop on the needle and tighten it up. Now that I have that one stitch cast on, I'm going to ignore those thumb stitches. I'm just going to let them stick out like that. And I'm going to continue knitting across the left needle. And it's amazing, ta-da, the thumb stitches are there and they're in the right place and they're just waiting for me to come back to them and finish them. See, there we go. So you're going to follow your pattern to knit the correct length for the length of the hand, and next up we're going to get started on the pinky finger. Now we're ready to get started on the fingers, and we're going to start with the pinky finger and work our way across the hand this way. Once you've made it to this part, the rest of the knitting goes pretty quickly because the fingers are really just little tubes to knit. It goes pretty quickly. I've written the pattern that we're using here to make it so that your stitches are always arranged correctly for, or the easiest way for you to work through and then have things arranged so that the right number's on each needle when you start decreasing for the tops of the fingers. So you'll want to follow along with your pattern and whatever it says for your size, but this specific pattern I'm going to use the numbers that we have for the medium size, the women's medium size. Okay. Here I am with my finished hand. I have the right side of the work, or my working yarn is over here on the right side. I'm going to take a double pointed needle and transfer the first 6 stitches onto the DPN. And you'll see that that gives us, this being the thumb, this is the pinky. These are going to be pinky stitches. Then we need some scrap yarn again and a tapestry needle, because we're going to put all the rest of the stitches around the hand on scrap yarn, and you're going to transfer just like we did when we transferred the thumb stitches to the scrap yarn. Okay. I think this is actually the numbers for the women's large, not the women's medium. I'm going to slide stitches up to the last 5. I'm going to leave the last 5 here on this needle. Okay, here we go. Our working yarn's coming from here. We have 6 stitches here and 5 stitches here, and I'm just going to start working. I'm going to start knitting. And in this particular one, I'm going to knit 4. And I'm going to pick up, whoops, I only knit 3 there. No wonder the count didn't work. Knit 4, pick up a new needle and knit the last 2. Now remember how we had this gap here at the thumb and we used the backwards loop cast on to build one stitch there? we're going to cast on, how many here? Just one. So again, I'm going to flip the yarn around and put it on the needle, creating one more stitch there. And now I'm going to continue knitting off the third needle. I'm just going to knit one. And that kind of seals in this backwards loop cast on that could have fallen off if I didn't knit another one. Now I'll pick up an empty needle in my right hand and knit the last four. Okay, so now this looks a lot like what we had going on with the cuff. We had 3 needles making a triangle, and we're knitting a tube, only this tube is a lot smaller because we just have 12 stitches going on this pinky finger. And just like we were doing before, it's small. It's going to go quickly. Your next stitch is always to the left of your working yarn. And you're just going to keep going around and around. And next up, we're going to learn how to measure the length of the finger that we're getting as we're knitting along, and how to do the decreases for the top of the fingers. If you're knitting these gloves for yourself, it's easy to try on the gloves as you go and just measure the length of the fingers as you're knitting them. If you're making these for someone else and they're not around to try the gloves on for you, you can either have them trace an outline of their hand for you, or you can just go with the standard measurements for the different sizes. I'm actually making these gloves to fit me, and something that's nice about hand knit gloves is I have really long fingers and a freakishly long thumb, so I'm able to measure them to fit, to make sure that they're going to fit my hand. Normally gloves end up kind of between the fingers, ends up being like here between my knuckles because I can never get them all the way down. That's store-bought gloves, not hand knit gloves. First, let me show you how to measure the fingers. Here I am with a finished hand, and I've completed, well, I think I've completed 1 pinky finger. I've knit it as long as the pattern tells me to. I'm going to go ahead and try it on. And this, as you can see, is a mess of ends and scrap yarn and everything else. Okay, so I've got the pinky on, and I hope you're following along with all of these bits of yarn flopping all over the place. I'm going to take my ruler and put it right down here, starting at the base of the pinky, and I'll measure up, and I have knit. Oh, when I measure to just under the needle here. Don't include the needle with the stitches in the measurement. Just stop to here. And it shows that I've knit just about 2 1/4 inches. When I look at it, it looks like it's long enough for me. There's only 1 decrease round on the fingers. So all that really does is close it up. So you really want to have it long enough for the finger, for the whole finger, but really nothing sticking out because we're just going to close it up. So that's how you measure the finger, and you're going to do that, of course, on each finger as you go. And now I'm going to show you how to do the decrease round on here. For this pinky, we have 12 stitches total, and it's just knit 2 together around. So knit 2 together. We have it 4 stitches on each needle, so it's knit 2 together twice on each needle. Okay. Then you'll cut your yarn, leaving yourself, I don't know, about 6 or 8 inches like this, and mine's already cut. And I'll take my tapestry needle again, thread that end onto the tapestry needle, and then here's my working yarn. This is what would be my next stitch. I'm just going to start there and thread this yarn back through all the stitches, the 6 remaining stitches. pulling the needle out as I go. Okay, that is a finished pinky, because when I tighten it up, that closes up the top, and I'll just weave in the end on the inside. It's easier to weave in the ends as you go. I'm just going to wait till I'm finished to do it. And then one last check. We'll make sure this is long enough for me. And yes, it is. In the next video, we're going to work on the upper hand. This next segment in knitting the upper hand, there are a couple of things that are important for the rest, a couple of techniques in doing this that are important for the other 3 fingers that we're going to be knitting. Let's take a look at the glove. Well, first look at my hand. We finished the pinky, and we're going to do something called the upper hand of the glove, which takes us from here, where we are right now, up a little bit higher, because the base of the area between these 2 fingers and these 2 fingers is higher than the base between the pinky and the ring fingers. You see what I'm saying? So we're way down here right now. We're going to knit a couple rows on this section right here to get us up to the base of these 2 fingers. Trust me, it makes for a better fitting glove. So I've already slid most of the stitches, as my pattern told me, onto these DPNs. I still have the scrap yarn in there. And I'll demonstrate a couple more because this is going to be important for the rest of the glove, that you know how to do this. There's the scrap yarn. I just slide my needle in as if to purl with the scrap yarn there and go on to the next one. And the last one, I set this up so I could show you this last one. The last one can be tricky. I'm going to pull out the scrap yarn in everything except for this last stitch. And the reason it's tricky is because sometimes the stitch ends up getting buried. I don't see where my stitch is right now. It's buried in there. But I've taken out the scrap yarn in everything but this last stitch. And if I pull it, the stitch magically comes out and I can put it up on the needle. You see that? This also happens to be attached to the working yarn, so it's easy to pull because it'll stretch out. So I take out my scrap yarn. All the stitches are on the needles, and I've already worked around up to this point. Now the pattern tells me that I need to pick up stitches at the base of the pinky. And otherwise, because if I didn't, there would just end up being this massive hole right here at the base of the pinky. So I'm going to pick up and knit. This is the technique. It's called picking up and knitting. 2 stitches here at the base of the pinky. And you want to space them out kind of evenly. You can, well, yeah, I usually want to space them out pretty evenly, but the most important thing is I want to pick up 2 legs of something. I want to pick up 2 strands of yarn. And what we have here are V's, because this was a cast on, a stitch that we cast on. This is, well, let me just show you how I would handle this. I'm going to put my needle into 2 legs right here. So I have 2 legs there, and I'm going to wrap it. This is like knitting with 1 needle. I'm going to wrap it and pull it through, and then I do a little test. I pull on it to see if it creates a huge hole, and that kind of did. I don't like the way that looks. So I'm going to find a different spot to wrap and pull through. I'm happier with that. I'm going to do it one more time over here. Put my needle into 2 legs of a stitch, wrap it and pull it through like a normal knit stitch, pull on it. That looks all right. I'm happy with the way that looks. And now I can just continue working in the round after I do one thing. I reattach my yarn, I worked all the way around, and now I just picked up 2 stitches. Here's my working yarn, and here is the tail end. I always tie these 2 together when I've attached new yarn. And I do this on each one of the remaining fingers when I do. That's going to keep the glove from falling or stretching out right there, falling apart right there, whatever. And that knot's not going to get in the way. So I'm just going to continue working around on these stitches. Here's my working yarn, here's my next stitch. I think you have 2 more rounds to knit, and next up we're going, well, the rest of the fingers are really the same as what we've worked on so far. You're going to use a technique of backwards loop cast on and picking up stitches, picking up and knitting the way that I've done here. So the middle finger and the first finger are no different than what you've already done. So next up we're going to do the thumb. You're going to see here that working the thumb really isn't much different than what you've done on the other fingers, but we're going to go over it together to make sure you're comfortable with doing it. Now let's pretend here that all my fingers are finished. My sample here doesn't have finished fingers, but it does have the thumb just the way we left it on the scrap yarn. So I'm going to take my double pointed needles, and with the right side of the work facing me, the thumb over here on the left, I'm going to slide my double pointed needles into the stitches. And in the pattern I tell you how many to put on each needle to make it so it works out well at the end. I'm not really counting right now, just giving you the idea. Okay, I'm having this problem again with the very last stitch being hard to see, so I'll pull out my scrap yarn in everything but this last stitch, and then when I pull, there's that last stitch. I can grab it and pull the scrap yarn out. Okay, all the stitches are now on double pointed needles, and we're ready to knit the thumb. I'm going to reattach the yarn. And to do that, well, here's another thing that I hadn't mentioned. You can use one of these clippy markers or a safety pin. These clippy markers are nice. I'm going to clip it in right here so that I can remember that right here is the beginning of my round. No mistake. I'll put my needle in and take my working yarn, and leaving myself about a 6-inch tail, I'm going to loop it over that back needle and pull it through. And just like on the other fingers, I have a few more stitches here because it's a thumb, but just like the other fingers, I will knit around. And then when I get to the end of the last needle, when I make it back to the beginning of my round, the pattern tells me that I need to pick up and knit 1 stitch here where I cast on one when we were working the thumb the first time. And you should be pretty comfortable with that because you've done it on the other fingers. I'm trying to get the extra bits of yarn out of the way. I'm going to grab 2 legs, wrap it and pull it through. Which can be tough. You have to really get a lot of tension on the working yarn to get it through what I've just picked. I pull on it, I think it looks good. And then, just like I did before, I'm going to tie the working yarn to the tail so I don't have to worry about it falling apart right there. So you're going to continue knitting the thumb the way you did with the other fingers. You're going to measure the thumb the same way that you did with the other fingers. And the only thing that's different about decreasing for the top is that you have 2 decrease rounds. You knit 2 together for 1 round, and you knit 2 together again for another round so that we get down to fewer stitches before we thread it onto the scrap yarn and tighten it up. Next up, we're going to talk about weaving in the ends and finishing the gloves. If you're like me and you waited until the very end to weave in your ends, this is what you have, this scary mess here. But I wanted to show you how to weave in the ends to close up any gaps that you might have between the fingers. With gloves, we are always reattaching yarn and starting a new little tube for the different fingers, and there are areas where you can get gaps in your work. But it also just happens that where the ends are, where you've attached new yarn, is exactly where you need something to be to maybe close that up with the tapestry needle. So let's take a look. Okay, here are my finished glove. Here is my finished glove, and I've switched colors on you here. And I've already scoped out that I have this hole. It'll be easier if I show you if I put it on. I have this hole here that I'm not happy with between these two fingers. You can see me poking my fingernail through there. I want to use this end to close this up. And to do that, I'm going to take my tapestry needle, thread it on there, and then I actually like to put the glove on when I do it. I think this is the easiest way to do it. So to close this up, my working yarn's coming from here. I'm just going to grab anything over on the other side of this hole. And really, ta-da, that closed it up. That was all it took. Usually just one little stitch is enough for it to fill that gap and close it up. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to just find a spot to poke the tapestry needle inside the glove, because I want to weave in the end on the inside of the glove, and then start to pull my hand out and find the needle and pull, 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 and then flip the glove inside out to that point right there. Okay. Now I'm ready to weave in this end. And this glove that I'm working on right here happens to be 100% wool. And so I can just weave in the end here by going in and out of a few stitches. And because wool, 100% wool here, is really sticky, it sticks to itself really well. So that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to come unraveled because wool is sticky, it'll hold it in place. But on these blue gloves that I knit, this is knit with a wool blend, and there is more of a chance of it coming undone, especially because this is a machine washable yarn, and I want it to be able to be machine washable, especially if I'm giving it as a gift. And to do that, I'm going to need to secure the end a little more. So using this same example, this is what I would do for a non-100% wool glove. I wanted to weave in the ends. First thing I'm going to do is separate the plies in half. This is a 4-ply yarn, and so I have 2 plies here and 2 plies here. I'm going to take 2 of those plies and thread them on the needle and take those 2 plies just half a stitch away so they're not coming out of the same place anymore. Then tie a double knot like this and really tighten it up, and then you can cut it short. And that end won't go anywhere. That end will be safe for wearing and for washing and whatever else. So when you take a look at your glove again, when I look at this, I have my ends here, and yeah, I can benefit. These gaps between the fingers can benefit from me weaving that in a little bit to close that up. And then of course I have the ends to weave in at the tips of the fingers, no problem once you get started. And that's how you're going to weave in the ends. The last thing you want to do is to block the gloves, and blocking is a way of smoothing out all your stitches and making them look really beautiful, which is important for anything, but it's even more important if you're giving these gloves away as a gift. And then the very last thing you want to do, of course, is to make another one. Good luck.
Bye.